بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى
No, but indeed man transgresses,
أن رآه استغنى
because he sees himself self-sufficient.
إن إلى ربك الرجعى
Indeed, to your Lord is the return.
أرأيت الذي ينهى
Have you seen the one who forbids
عبدا إذا صلى
a servant when he prays?
أرأيت إن كان على الهدى
Have you seen if he is upon guidance
أو أمر بالتقوى
or enjoins righteousness?
أرأيت إن كذب وتولى
Have you seen if he denies and turns away?
ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى
Does he not know that Allah sees?
كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية
No. If he does not desist, we will surely drag him by the forelock.
ناصية كاذبة خاطئة
A lying, sinning forelock.
فليدع ناديه
Then let him call his associates.
سندع الزبانية
We will call the angels of hell.
كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب
No, do not obey him, but prostrate and draw near to Allah.
Sadaqallahu al-Azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is Judy Ramadan on FM frequency 87.7. We are also on our website rr365.co.uk/listen live, and inshallah on our Facebook live, Radio Ramadan's Facebook. I am your host Zubair Akram. On 7th of April 23, 16th of Ramadan, an iftar in Glasgow is going to be at 8:13, 13 minutes past 8. And as always, I have my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad with me. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا.
Ahlan wa sahlan, marhaba bikum, mashallah. So Sheikh, Surah Alaq, and ayah number 6 onwards, it makes different sense every day. It makes a different meaning every day. For some reason, I understand it better. Not for some reason, for known reasons. It makes it so much sense to me in Urdu. हरगिज़ नहीं इंसान सरकशी करता है इस बिना पर कि वो अपने आप को बेनियाज देखता है. हरगिज़ नहीं इंसान सरकशी. कल्ला इन्नल इंसान लयतगा. हालांकि पलटना यकीनन तेरे रब ही की तरफ है. तुमने देखा उस शख्स को जो एक बंदे को मना करता है. We will go on to that. Now, this ayah, Kalla innal insana layatgha ar-ra'ahu istaghna. I was thinking it goes straight to the discussion we had yesterday, right at the end of the program. It's not just your financial self-sufficiency, your emotional self-sufficiency, and when people think they are sufficiently accomplished in knowledge when they're not, and then the mistakes they make and how they mislead not just people, not just small groups, but entire communities, and how it makes a negative impact on our own community and how we are interacting with other communities. Will this ayah map that situation as well?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So this set of ayahs straight after. Remember, the first set of ayahs have a very interesting function. There's lots of functions for the first, 3 or 4, first 5 verses. There's lots of function. There's function of underlining the attributes of Allah, the names of Allah, the underlining of the whole process of preserving and propagating ilm, knowledge, the whole sanctity of the revelation itself, the whole idea of tadarruj we talked about, which is the whole issue of the Prophet ﷺ being the final prophet. Therefore, by the divine wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was commanded to be given this over 2 decades, more than 2 decades, 23 years. There's also the idea of the utility of knowledge, which is it's compounded, which means that you can build. When we say this phrase "building on the shoulders of giants," the reason we can do that is because we can have a cumulative gathering of everything that people have had before, and we build upon that. So nothing gets lost. It doesn't matter who did it, doesn't matter why they did it. Something that somebody did in the past can now be a game changer for people today. And this in science and technology, research and development is well known. Somebody does research on something that's irrelevant to most people. Somebody picks it up and finds it and uses it somewhere completely different, and it's a game changer. Well known in science and technology because it's thinking outside the box. It's going out of your echo chamber, for example. The thing I was talking about yesterday is people have echo chambers where everybody says the same thing and nobody disagrees. That leads to the complete demolition of knowledge, ilm, because it's echo, is dhann. And this is what Allah says, إِن يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَحْوَى الْأَنفُسُ. All these people do, and the majority of people, is that they fall into the trap of using conjecture and hearsay and probability and things that are not definitive. And what Ghazali talked about yesterday in his Iqtisad, in his book on Creed, qati', something that's definitive, 100%. We know it to be factual, established beyond any doubt. So people are in their echo chambers. People live without checking their blind spots. Remember, yesterday we talked about Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari was there with him to tell him about his blind spots. So in public office, it's very important that you have advisors that tell you about your blind spots. And if you don't, then your blind spots become bigger and bigger. And that's one of the ways of tazkiyah. I said that one of the ways Imam Ghazali says that you can rectify the soul is to have somebody who checks out your blind spots, who basically, in rally driving, there's a person driving the car and there's somebody navigating. So if you don't have the person saying right, left, right, coming up in 40 meters, the car will crash right away. That's like your nafs. If you want to have a good metaphor that came to mind, there is that. I don't know why it came, but a rally driver, your nafs is like a horse which is untamed, and unless you tame it, it will kill you. The nafs is the same thing. You have to.
Taming requires a murshid, someone who is.
I don't want to go into too deep and
okay,
impose privilege upon people. But essentially, that's how cumulative knowledge works. Like, do you not think that if you talk about any technology that we use now, it's 2.0, 3.0, any computer with the chip base for its data processing, do you not think that's built upon something prior to it, the knowledge and research? So do you not think that if you spoke to somebody who had been through a phase of being very arrogant and they'd tamed that in some way, do you not think that'd be helpful for you? Do you not think if you're going to rectify, look, if you're going to, in public policy, if you want to rectify criminals, it's very good. It's a lot of research on this, that you get them to speak to reformed criminals. Okay, if you want to reform young, like in Glasgow, all these young guys trying gangsters. Yeah. The best way to deal with that is not to do something physical to them, which came to my mind, but I'm going to mention what it is to get them to meet people that were there 20 years ago and who've seen the error of that way.
And that gets naturally corrected because
because then the wisdom of a person who've had that fault, who now is fixed is like a murshid. Like I'm talking about a gangster from the 90s from our from our heyday, in the Shields, who's now rectified themselves, speaks to one of these guys that's dealing drugs on the street corner, and gets to know him, and then he at some point it will click that this is not a good path for numerous reasons. This is blind spots. This is a murshid. A murshid is that person who was fallen and rectified themselves. So a murshid was never a person that was a saint, born a saint, meaning, in fact, very rarely, but usually people that had some frailty, even if we didn't know about it, even if we don't know about it in their life story. Like you'll hear about great scholars like Ibrahim ibn Adham, for example, or Bishr al-Hafi. Bishr al-Hafi, famous for picking up, if I remember correctly, he picked up a piece of writing which had the name of Allah on it and put perfume on it and put it in a high place while he was drunk. And because of that, Allah granted him such honor that Bishr al-Hafiz, like Bishr al-Hafiz, you don't have to say much. But the thing is, we know about that fall, that he must have been drinking. Okay. But then he rectified. But the great people of our past, some of them we don't know about. No one mentions anything like that about them. You don't know the internal struggles they had, the internal issues of arrogance, or they might have had issues of deceit or conceit or something. No one knows about it, didn't tell him, but they figured out that was the case. Like Ghazali, for example, his early life is well known to be from a very pious family, had a very excellent upbringing, had a very good sense of perception, but right at the point of his pinnacle, he was afflicted with intense insincerity and arrogance. Like right at the pinnacle of his career.
When he left and he went into...
Yeah, and when he was, the rector of the Dars Nizamiya, when he was having that tenure, it was at that point that perfect life of piety, obedience, scholarship, all the thing came to a fore because he was doing it for the wrong reasons. And then while he was speaking, he started to stutter and he ended up not being able to complete his ideas. He was not able to recite. So it's like when we say Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, the Prophet ﷺ is being told in that if you recite for your own benefit, or you speak for your own benefit, or you read for your own benefit, or you do anything for your own benefit, you will not get anywhere. The Prophet is being told to recite in the name of your Lord. It's like Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, it was as if he was in a situation where he knows he has to teach. Yeah, there's a basic command of the Prophet ﷺ to, the best of you is those that teach the Quran, that teach the religious sciences, and that means that you have to do it, but then do it with the name of your Lord. It's like you have to follow the sunnah of Allah, which is you do it for the right reasons. The name of your Lord meaning intention. And so when that tension disappears, is at that point you have a crisis. And Imam Ghazali had that crisis, and he ended up having to rectify by basically dismantling himself. So these verses, which are verse 5 after we 6, Kalla, it's focused on this idea that these are people that are doing things based upon the notion that they have everything, that they don't need anything. This pride, this arrogance, this ostentation, this sense of self-sufficiency, which is one of the things that was marked within the life of Fir'aun, for example.
But Sheikh, this is kind of almost a statement made that surely man transgresses, so it's bound to happen. It will always happen that a man will transgress, right? So it's a given, and then because we know it's a given, we need to be aware and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, it's a given. Yeah, in the insana, because it's there's umum in the verse, because the al-insan is like for istighraq al-jins in balagha. It's like encompasses every single human being. That issue of tughyan is the propensity of every single human being. Doesn't mean it happens to everyone. It's built.
It's inbuilt, right?
It's inbuilt. It's like the Prophet said that al-ajalatu, this idea of haste and and wanting everything is like he said it's like inbuilt within the clay of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. So these are things that are inbuilt. These are kind of nature nurture thing. This is a kind of nature sense which is inbuilt within us. A test is, everything we have is a test, but that's specific. This issue of tughyan is just to, is to overstep, is to be, it's like we had talked about yesterday. Tughyan is like this, is a tsunami of urges that lead you to oppression. And this is what Fir'aun did.
And Tughyan also has this inherent problem of being at unrest within himself, because it's in a constant
Flux, yes.
flux. The person is also not at peace with himself. When he commits Tughyan, he is not at peace.
Yeah, so this is, it's a good point, because it's like this swelling of discontent with the person themselves is because the Tughyan is, we always think about it as affecting other people. Idhab, when Prophet Musa is told, Idhab ila Fir'auna innahu tagha. Yeah, Musa is told, go to Fir'aun, because indeed he has taken the step of being taghi. And the tughyan of Fir'aun, this injustice that he's committing, is, he basically stems from this simple thing, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am your most highest of lords. And what's Allah saying in Surah Iqra? Iqra bismi rabbika. So there's the idea of a Rabb, there's only one Rabb. And the tughyan of Fir'aun was the ultimate manifestation of tughyan. But everybody in their own place, their own level, in their own small place is also taghi, is also in the state of kind of oppression of other people, of themselves, because it's an inbuilt state of every human being. And then the whole purpose is the rectifying, and the rectification is through what's at the beginning, which is iqra, which is to read and to educate yourself and to bring etiquette into your own life. And this is on the back of revelation, on the back of knowledge, on the back of insights that are given by people who've started to sort out this problem of tughyan in themselves. So istighna in this, because it says innahu tagha, that Fir'aun was overstepped the mark. Allah says here, kalla innal insana liyatgha arra'ahu istaghna, because he sees himself self-sufficient. So the tughyan here is actually explained. You can say tughyan is different things, but here it's to do with this idea that they will live forever, they'll be unrestricted, they will have everything they want without any need externally. Whereas ilm is not that type. No one can survive without the knowledge of previous people. If you find yourself in the middle of a forest and it's getting cold and you need to heat yourself up, you will know, I know everybody will know, that there is a way of lighting a fire. Even if you don't know what it is, you're thinking somebody in the past, in human history, made a fire which allowed them to stay alive by heating themselves, allowed them to cook something to eat, for example. And so you're reliant upon that previous, experience of a person. But to think you're self-sufficient, it is from, and this is actually very fascinating. If you look at the verse, Ar-ra'ahu istaghna, he thinks, ra'i. Ra'a is from this idea of, in the history of fiqh, they have this idea of ahlul ra'i. Ahlul ra'i is as juxtaposed to ahlul hadith. Ahlul hadith were people that took the letter, almost like the letter of the hadith, and applied it and said, well, this is where we get our knowledge from. Whereas ahlul ra'i said that the hadith in the Quran, we have to understand them and then look for an answer based on that. Which is absolutely correct. Imam Malik was a proponent of Ra'i, even though Shafi'i said he wasn't, he was, So it's an interesting thing. But in this context, it's this idea of my opinion, my way or the highway. So the elevation of my opinion, and what's going to come into combat with this? Ilm. Because Ra'i is essentially dhan, it's essentially conjecture, it's essentially your own disposition based upon your limited experience of life.
Okay. Sheikh, we spoke about takfir yesterday.
Mm.
right? And we spoke about. I just want to understand, without this kind of like this event that has gone on in last few weeks, couple of weeks, what's the need that scholars have felt that they must get to a point where they have to do takfir?
I'm sorry. What's the
What is it that has caused scholars to feel responsible that they at some point will have to do takfir?
what's the reason why they have to? Because the thing is, the Prophet Ali Sallallahu came with a teaching, and certain things within them are thabit. They're established and they're known, and they're not they're, they're, there's things that cannot be changed, because this is what essentially the Prophet came to give.
Hmm.
So the things that he came to give are the shahada, and which is made up of two things, which is a belief in Allah and the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and everything that they brought is true. The things that we know that the Prophet said exactly and specifically and clearly, if you deny that or reject it, it has an effect on the overall message. So these qat'iyat, which are definitive elements of our religious faith, are of such importance that if you undermine them, you essentially undermine the whole fabric of a building, which means that the whole building's purpose, its wisdom, its functionality is affected, which is
And
why scholars have.
whose responsibility it is then to pick up this piece and say and make a point of it that now this person has left the fold of Islam, or this
Yeah, so
community.
the thing is, over Islamic history, scholars have studied and debated amongst themselves to see what are those definitives.
Mhm.
Do you understand? So without going, if you don't want me to go into a discussion here, which can go way above your head, we'll keep
No,
it
no,
simple. Like, the Hitch of Qadianis, for example, a simple
yeah.
one. Like, if these, at what point does something they state go out of the fold of Islam?
Mhm.
So that, obviously, the finality of the Prophet Ali Salatu Wasalam is something that Sunni Islam considers to be a qat'i, a definitive absolute in our religious faith, established clearly by the Prophet himself. So denying what he said, the Prophet said, is to deny essentially his ability to convey to you the final message. And so therefore, whatever you're part of, it's not Islam. And you're free to leave. I mean, this the whole thing is, there's not some kind of stricture upon a person remaining within this faith. If they understand the function of this religion and where it came from, how it established its veracity and its utility for humanity, I think proven throughout human history, then you'll understand that people would want to remain within Islam, and they would accept that there's certain thawabit,
No,
there's
but you
certain
said that
things that are
they're free
set.
to leave. You said you're free to leave, but is it the case? Because irtidad, murtad, and its implications, it's not as simple, is it?
No, but the thing about
Apostasy.
that discussion is the pre-modern issue of ridda is very clearly related to identity and affiliation to a sort of political entity in the past, well known. Like, the idea of religion itself is a very modern construct. It comes at the end of the 19th century through, as a result of colonialism, mapping it of different peoples. And when you map out different peoples and cultures and colors and ethnicities, you have to start to talk about what are their beliefs, what are their systems of government and belief systems. And then they came out with this idea of religion, separate from political suffrage, separate from political authority, whereas traditional societies never drew that distinction at all. So if you were part of Islam at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you were part of the citizenship in our parlance of Madinah Nawara. So people talk about the constitution of Madinah Nawara. It wasn't a constitution; it was an agreement for a specific sets of belief which made you part of religion. And if you left it, remember, if you left it, you were leaving that political allegiance, and it was almost as if you're siding with an enemy. It was understood. And we know this because sometimes scholars have discussions about the fact that even at that time, they have discussions of the fact that if a person left and there wasn't a clear, um, kind of threat to public order or a strengthening of an enemy's position, then that was the person's own consciousness. It's very famous in the Hanafi school. That's basically the logic that Imam Sarakhsi, for example, makes. So that's something that if you're free to leave. Meaning, if you understand Islam is in its entirety, there's nothing holding you back. Like ikraha fi din. But the thing is, the thawabit, interesting enough, are very, very limited in a certain sense. Because I was, I'm teaching a course on Aqidah, and one of the things that we're talking about now is takfir. In the discussion of takfir, there's the same scholar will say a certain statement is kufr in one book on, say, for example, law, fiqh, and in a book that he's written on Aqidah, he will say that same thing is not kufr. Because even depending on the context, you have a different understanding of what kufr is. Like, because fiqh is related to implementation, it's related to public order, it's related to blocking the means to harm on society generally, whereas Aqidah, creed, is about talking about abstract things in a different way. So this is why when Ibn Hazm, for example, he's got a very famous book, Kitab al-Ijma', which is all about things of consensus. I went through that very quickly with my teachers. Towards the end of my studies, I was going through lots of books very quickly by just reading them, because they didn't need much commentary if you've studied. So I went through Ibn Hazm's book with one of my teachers, and the one thing he did say is, like, be careful about the exact wording of what Ibn Hazm is saying. Like, something to you which will seem exactly the same thing, if you word it slightly differently, that will not be a point of ijma'. Like yesterday, if you listen to what I was saying very, very clearly, I said this issue of if a person says that it's not a sin for a Muslim to commit homosexual act with another, with another male, obviously. If you say that is not a sin, that is kufr, that statement has to be exactly as it is. Because if you add into that some other kind of concoction, then it affects the thing that we've had consensus over. We've not had consensus over, for perhaps. So this is the thing about knowledge, is that you have to build the case up for what are these definitive issues. Okay. And then everything other than that is dhann. It's conjectural, it's possible. Yeah, it might be something that we strongly disagree with, or it might be something that's heresy. It might be something that takes a person out of the normative understanding of Islam, normative practice of Islam, for example. So we have ideas like fisq, which is irreligiosity, or we have tabdi', which is to be a person of heresy, for example. We have all these terms that encroach upon kufr, so a person being outside the fold of Islam. That's all because we have a knowledge civilization. And if you want to replace it, then exactly. And so you want to replace it, you replace it with this: ar-ra'ahu istaghna. He thinks, I think, I feel, I want that this person is not a Muslim, or this person is a hypocrite, or this idea is not a good idea. I think X, Y, and Z. I don't, at a certain point, in our religious tradition.
It's not about what I think. At a certain point, it's definitive, it's defined, and there's a process.
Yeah, it's like so many things that are part of our religious structure. Al-qati' la yarfa'u illa biqati'in. Like, there's terms and legal maxims that we use in courts of law. Something that's definitive is not removed except by something that's definitive. Al-yaqin la yazul bi shak. That something that's definite is not removed by something that is doubtful. There's so many understandings that are inbuilt within our religious tradition, all coming from where? From the Quran. It was when Allah condemns the polytheists, He said about their worship of idols, all they're doing is following conjecture. They think that this, if you worship it in a specific way, will help you in some way. It's just made up. Hocus pocus. Like, why don't you slightly change the idol? Is it going to work? It's all dhann. And so when Allah says, they think that they're self-sufficient, there's two problems there. One is anything they're doing is based upon their own limited understanding of knowledge. And then the second thing is that the concept is istighna, that we don't need anything. You need food. If you're fasting, keep fasting. And I was watching some of my son. He likes this. He watches this YouTube. So I sit down and watch some things with him. He's called The Frustrated Gamer. If you want to watch it, it's quite funny. Anyway, he I think he fasted for I don't know how many days without water, without food or something. And I was saying, like, he's going to have to at some point break it, and he had to break it. Like, he had a challenge, like a challenge to stay like 10 days without food or something. And actually this morning when I woke up, my son was, because I said we need to go Jum'ah, and so and I said, do you think this YouTuber is going to Jum'ah? And he says, yeah. And I said, why? Because he says, I'm Muslim. And I said, are you sure? And he says, yes, he is, but we didn't see him not being a Muslim. And my son's 7. I don't know where he got that from. I don't know where he got that from, but
the default.
So this is an American. I think he's like American, white American YouTuber, just makes like videos of him doing challenges. So it was funny that, you know, he looks for an excuse for his fellow human.
But to be what he thinks is the best for him instead of other way around.
He says, look, he looks like a good guy.
Yeah,
because he did say that. He says like he gives,
and he never said he's not.
Like, he helps people. So I thought, yeah, good. That's good. Good start, inshallah.
An ad break, reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. After the break, inshallah, I'm going to pick up on this concept that it is only the 19th century that religion is defined the way we know it to be, the religiosity, and how people have found religion as a point of division. This is something that I want to explore a little bit more on after this ad break.
Radio Ramadan 365, sound for the soul.
Awarded the UK's Best Muslim Charity of the Year, Muslim Global Relief, bringing hope to life for 20 years in over 40 countries around the world. Every water pump you helped to install, every needy person you helped to feed, every orphan child that you sent to school has a powerful impact on people's lives. Let us continue to make change. Make a 100% zakat donation today. Visit muslimglobalrelief.org.
रास्ते कितने ही मुश्किल क्यों ना हो, जब कोई साथ दे तो मंजिल मिल ही जाती है। गजाली एजुकेशन ट्रस्ट गुज़श्ता 25 सालों से लाखों बच्चों को स्कूल में ला चुका है। आपकी मदद से पाकिस्तान आगे बढ़ सकता है, हर बच्चा पढ़ सकता है।
अगर आपको या आपके किसी जानने वाले को टाइप 2 शुगर की तशवीश हुई है या टाइप 2 शुगर के खतरे से दो चार है, तो हमारी टीम NHS ग्रेटर ग्लासगो एंड क्लाइड में आपको मजीद सीखने और अपनी शुगर को कंट्रोल करने में मदद कर सकती है। हम आपको मुख्तलिफ खिदमात की मदद से हिमायत कर सकते हैं और जरूरत पड़ने पर इंटरप्रेटर भी फराहम करते हैं। हमारे पास उर्दू, पंजाबी और अरबी में भी वसाइल मौजूद हैं। मजीद जानने के लिए हमारी वेबसाइट www.nhsggc.scot T2 डायबिटीज हब पर जाएं या हमारे हब पर कॉल करें 0141 531 8901।
Radio Ramadan 365, sound for the soul.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Radio Ramadan 87.7 FM. Program Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. Just before the break, Sheikh, you commented that it is only 19th century where religion as we know it was defined and people were kind of classified in this pigeonhole, if you like, or this box.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that.
Yeah, because well, that's academics. I mean, if you want to know that that's true, if you Google it, you'll find that out. The whole idea of compartmentalizing things especially in sociology and anthropology, is in terms of religion, separating it from politics, power, ideas of philosophical ideas. There was never really a separation. So if you wanted to do philosophy, thinking, you wanted to talk about a just life, you wanted to talk about political theory, you wanted to talk about how to create an ideal state, the input of that would essentially be religious, what we now understand to be religious in nature, but it was intertwined. But when you start to study, when the colonial powers came into different countries and different nations, because they're in control of it. Now, what do they do? You'll know this in the subcontinent. And I remember I was at university when I was doing Arabic studies, and I think still ninth floor in Glasgow University. I was just fascinated with all these documents, all these books from the late 19th century, early 20th century on languages that you've never heard of, religious traditions that you've never heard of. Like, you go to the Sikh section, there's books published 150 years ago about the Sikh religion by Reverend such and such, about the Sanskrit language and the orthography and the manuscripts, and all these studies by who? Western people, not by the people of the lands themselves. So people went to convert people to Christianity. That didn't go really well, but also they went to help them. They had to study everything about these people. Like, you'll speak to nowadays, evangelical Christians or missionaries. They go and they learn the language, learn the customs of the people, and that's for the simple reason that they want to ingrain themselves in the culture, so that they can then use that in some way to convert people. Remember when I was in Yemen, I fell quite ill, and this is actually quite, I'll say it, I didn't trust the doctors in Sana'a where I was ill. So somebody said there's a doctor outside in one of the small villages who's a Christian, and they've got a clinic and they've got a very good setup. So I went there because the medical diagnosis, and it was all based upon helping people and then using that to then obviously push something. But they've been there for 20 years, so it wasn't overt. It wasn't like an overt Christian missionary center or whatever. So this all is part and parcel of studying colonialized nations. I don't know why we're talking about this, by the way.
I just wanted to. It comes with this concept that there are scholars who have advocated the fact that our. Iqbal says, "Khas hai tarkib mein qaume Rasool Hashmi." Khas hai tarkib mein qaume Rasool Hashmi.
Yeah, there's some uniqueness to the community of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm forgetting the first misra of this, where he refutes it. Is we are not, because na Turani hai, na Irani hai, na Afghani hai, khas hai tarkib mein. So he refutes that you are because of your ethnicity, not because you're not because of geography. You are because of you are from the Qawm-e Rasool Hashimi.
Yeah, so this is like this. So this is he's made my point, khalas. Because the whole point is he's saying your entity, your most essential entity is your religious identity. The moment that you do that, your Iranian, your Persian, your Arabic entity is secondary to this entity, which is belonging to this entity, which is al-Hashimi, al-Muhammadi, this kind of Muhammadian, Hashemite, prophetic lineage or belonging. And so the thing I was saying, if you keep going on this idea of colonial powers, they had to study and see what they were dealing with to rule and to enact laws and to be able to divide and rule. Remember, divide and rule is all about, to know where if you look at the Kurdish issue, I mean, Turkey, the whole Kurdish issue is actually the pivotal issue in the Kurdish election and Turkish elections, because if you look at the maps of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, it's built so that a natural nation, ethnic nation, is carved, so that it is not part of anyone and it's split. And so, do you not think when they drew the maps, they had people ethnicists who came in and then decided, okay, the best thing is cut this, so this will remain an open wound amongst these four or five nations. That's what they did. And they couldn't have done that unless they had this deep study of tribal culture there, linguistic culture, ethnicity, religious belonging, meaning, ethical belonging, like Sunni Shia and so on and so forth, and how that affects the ethnic split. And so at that point, they said, okay, these are religious divisions. Okay, let's map them out. So these are people who have different belief systems, and now they call them religions. But in the past, those nations, if you went to them, they would say this is the way of life. Like every single, the Confucius, the Hindu, the Muslim, everybody would say it's our this is a way of life, this path. So they would call it a path, and they wouldn't call it. And we in Islam we call it deen. Deen is like a transaction.
Deen.
Transaction. Islam is a deen. Islam is a name which means to submit. Okay, and from Islam, and then deen is from the root which is to have a transaction. In other words, what we're doing is having a transaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what it is. If you want to call it a religion, that's you using modern terminology. What Islam is a transaction.
Is deen not way of life? No.
Deen is no. From the linguistic perspective, it's
transaction.
a transaction.
So it's the same as leen den. So in Urdu, leen den. So it's
yes, of course.
Okay. So transaction. So deen is a variant of.
So there's a question of what this word deen, which is Islam, becomes very fascinating because it's like numerous hadith mentioned that the contract between the slave and Allah is that if the slave obeys Allah, Allah will not punish them. Like that's a basic level, but is deeper in terms of if you approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by a handspan, Allah will come to you rushing. So that's also a kind of contract. That Allah is a promise. So if you do this is what will happen. And so, it's also related to the fact that on the Day of Judgment, you will come and everything's weighed. So the whole weighing thing goes to, if you go to a market, today's Friday, so in Turkey you have Friday markets. They have all these scales. You weigh everything, and in the Day of Judgment, everything's weighed. It's a deen. It's like this is a deen. This is a transaction, and so this is how it was in the past.
Because it's a radio program and it's recorded and people are listening, and just in case people think I've committed blasphemy with Iqbal's poetry. The actual verse is यही मकसूद फितरत है यही रमज़ मुसलमानी अखुवत की जहांगीरी मोहब्बत की फरावानी बुताने रंग खून को तोड़कर मिल्लत में गुम हो जा न तूरानी रहे बाकी न ईरानी न अफगानी बुताने रंग खून को तोड़कर मिल्लत में गुम हो जा न तूरानी रहे बाकी न ईरानी न अफगानी तो ये I mix the two. The khas hai tarkib mein ek aur maqsood hashmi is a different poem.
Okay. So millat, he mentions millat. Millat is like millat abikum Ibrahim, like the Quran mentions it as well.
बुताने रंग खून को तोड़कर मिल्लत में गुम हो जा. How would you translate it?
The false aspirations
break the idols of color and blood and become lost in the community. Let neither Turanis, Iranians, or Afghans exist.
Yes.
So it's the same concept. So it's so you're defined by your faith, not your ethnicity.
Yes. So this thing, the reason why this is important even today. I mean, I said the whole idea of mapping out languages, ethnicities, ethical belief systems was so that they could use this to essentially categorize people. Because the British Empire famously was very famous at civil service was very famous at categorizing and being very efficient in that. You'll know this, even in the subcontinent. Even religious studies scholars who went to, for example, Lucknow or went to the Dars Nizami system in what's it called, Farangi Mahal, for example. The system of education there was perfectly suited to going into the civil service under the British, so everything could be mapped out. But this is in the past. Now what happens is religion is used as a word to undermine, organize what we now know as religion, like Islam or Christianity. But for example, saying that religions are inherently violent. So the reason why we should not have a religious, and this is at the core of a lot of discussion we had in last couple of days about even like about takfir and things and attacks on Islam, is that one of the ways of saying the religion is not relevant and should be discussed in the public space is because they say, well, we don't want religion because look at all the bloodshed that religion causes. It's one of the biggest arguments against religion, this mantra of religious violence. So basically, the reason why we don't do religion is because if you bring religion into politics or your public life, what happens is it becomes divisive. That's absolutely wrong. All the studies that we know about wars, for example, the most obvious thing is if you want to look about division, think about wars, think about killing people. Okay. And if you look at the research, just off the top of my head, I think 6% of wars in human history, this is based on at least three major studies on this. About 6% of wars in human history were on the basis of religious conviction or about religious iconography. The rest, which is 94% of wars in human history, were not about religious, what we understand now to be religious issues. About 3% of people killed in wars in human history, or just slightly, it's roughly about 3%, were killed in wars which are ostensibly religious wars. All the rest were about power, wealth, whatever it wasn't about religion. So what that means that religion came, and the whole basis of religious belief is actually the core of every religious tradition is, the golden rule, which is love for your brother what you love for yourself. This was the words of the Prophet ﷺ. But in Judaism and Christianity, it's expressed in different ways, such as the golden rule in Christianity would be do to others as you would want to be done by. Same thing. So this is religion comes with this universal idea, universal sense of dignity of human beings. And this is why, when you were talking about who decides about takfir and why is it so important? This is why it's so important, because once you have a strong religious basis and tenet and theology, then that is what preserves sane society, preserves life. It has a set of values which you cannot argue with, because once you start taking things away, you take away things that help preserve life, help preserve stability, help preserve what we call the kulliyat al-khams, which is protecting of religion, of lineage, of intellect, of wealth, of honor. These are basically at the core. And Imam
Maqasid al-Sharia.
Maqasid al-Sharia. Imam Ash-Shatibi says that these are at the core of not just Islam, but every other religion, Sinan. Is that not true, Sinan? You can't hear what you can hear what I'm saying, but is that true?
What?
That these are the basis of life. Yes.
There's the five things.
Five things. And this is not just amongst, Imam Shatibi says, not just in the Islamic community, but in every community. But he says the Islamic faith has absolute knowledge of these. In other words, we preserved them and served these issues and wrote about them and fleshed out all the details in a way that other religious traditions didn't do until Islam, and I mentioned this a couple of days ago, inspired them to do so. The Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, Maimonides and Aquinas at the core of these people. And so it all comes from this idea that you have to base whatever you do based on knowledge and certainty. And the opposite of that coin is كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. So that is the opposite of the coin, because it's almost saying, Allah is saying, if you do not do Iqra, that whole first five verses, you will end up being in the other side, the flip side of the coin, which is no revelation, no inspiration, no sense of higher purpose, no sense of epistemological truth of what is right and what is wrong. What will you do? Ar-ra'i. Ar-ra'i is your own opinion. My opinion is different from your opinion. What you consider, and we're living in the age of feeling, to be honest. I don't feel I want to do this, and if I feel this is offensive, then it's offensive. And you're living in the age of microaggression. You're living in the age of having trigger warnings. We're living in this age, which is such a strange age. Because even in research, you know this, you know what trigger warning is, don't you? A trigger warning is if you give a talk about something sensitive, you should tell people in advance that this is going to
Yep.
shock you.
Yep.
Do you know the
Yep.
research done on this? Stanford and Harvard have done research on this. This is just before COVID and just during COVID as well, that they did research on this idea where they basically tested people and gave them trigger warnings before something like this. We're going to talk about, for example, gratuitous violence, for example, or domestic abuse, for example, or mental illness, for example. And they gave people a very clear warning at the beginning that they're going to talk about this.
Mm.
And in another set of controlled individuals, they didn't give any warning. And the stress levels after each were marked, and studies were done on the qualitative effects of that on the individuals that were there. And guess what happened? The people had no trigger warning. The trigger warnings made them so anxious that they felt they had to be even more anxious.
Mm. Mm.
And so, like people say, well, did you put out trigger warning? Well, the trigger warning creates anxiety, and even if it's like this thing that if somebody watches a really scary movie and they say there's such a scary movie, don't watch it, blah blah blah, and then not that I've done that, but I'm just thinking that's the kind of conversation I hear. If you go and it's not scary, you feel you need to be scared.
Yeah.
So it plays on other people's perceptions of what you need to be.
Surah Alaq, 96th Surah, Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. We've covered, I think the most important thing that I've taken from this is the concept of tadarruj, graduation, how powerful this concept is to build life, to build success, however you define success. Tadarruj is in its core. And then
because it comes from daraja, isn't it? Daraja is like levels, and darajat is like steps and things. So yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. And then speaking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Iqra, and read, and he's reading alayhi salatu wasalam, and what he's reading he will keep reading for 23 years. And then he will read and he will teach, he will read and he will teach. And then the next part of the surah starts with the 6th ayah, Kalla innal insana la yatgha, surely man transgresses. And Sheikh, how different every ayah means at a different stage of your life, events. And what we covered yesterday, how someone has committed wrong to issue a takfir fatwa, and then we checked that, responsibly checked it with authority, with correct theology behind it, and argued the case that how it is important to have takfir, but how important it is to have it correctly.
It's important to have takfir as a function. People need to know that there's certain things that cannot be said, and that needs to be conveyed to the people that make a statement that could be construed as that. This is very important. People don't understand that that's also part of it. But you don't have to make a video about that if you can get that message to the person, for example. So that's very, very clear to do. And so you look at each situation in terms of the fallout of each instance. This is what fiqh is based upon. It's what Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Yesterday, the thing I didn't mention is that people can have knowledge and be pious, but they can be mistaken. Like Imam Ahmad was mistaken in his idea that a person who leaves the prayer is a kafir, until he spoke with his teacher Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Shafi'i started to ask him a couple of questions. And Imam Ahmad said, well, he's the person a kafir because he's not praying. And the Prophet said, the difference between us and the disbelievers is the prayer. And then Imam Shafi'i says, so what took him out of it? He said, he left the prayer. And he says, okay, how are you going to bring him back in? And Imam Ahmad said, he thought a bit, and he said, I'll tell him to do the shahada, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And Imam Shafi'i said to him, he never denied it. He's doing it. He said, ma dama yaquluhu. He said, ma dama yaquluhu. He said he's never stopped saying it. So Imam Ahmad thought a bit and he was quiet. Now that rational Imam Ahmad rahimahullah makes perfect sense to everybody to say the hadith says this, He's out of Islam. He has to become Muslim. How do you become Muslim? You say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Okay, Imam Shafi'i said he never stopped saying that. And Imam
It is
Ahmad was silent. This is why Imam Ahmad actually used to say that if I ever had opportunity to go to 2 lessons and I couldn't go to both, which is the lesson of Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna, the great hadith scholar, Imam Shafi'i, he said I would never miss the lesson of Shafi'i, because if I miss the lesson of a Shafi'i and miss what he said, I will never get it from any other place in terms of explanation. But if I miss the lesson of Sufyan ibn Uyayna on hadith, I can forget that hadith somewhere else. I cannot get the explanation of the hadith except from
the logic,
Shafi'i.
the logic,
The rationale, the thinking
rationale.
behind it. And so this is what Imam Shafi'i, he spent 20 years in the Badiyah. He spent 20 years with tribes like Bani Hudayl, just strengthening his Arabic, knowing the nuances of language, knowing that intentionality makes a big difference. The way you say something and the intention and how that is affected by the time and place makes a difference. Imam Shafi'i, when he was in Makkah al-Mukarram, he has certain statements he made that he then changed when he went to the Badiyah. When he went to Baghdad, he changed them. When he went to Egypt, when he passed away, rahimahullah, he changed them. In other words, he saw that every single context within which you move has a different reality, and you grow in your knowledge. And that's, the tadarruj thing. Imam Shafi is a perfect example of that. He studied with Imam Malik, rahimahullah, in Medina, Munawwara, the city of the Prophet. He studied with Imam Hassan al-Shaybani and Abu Yusuf in Baghdad. And then when he got to Cairo, Fustat, more specifically, he then started to think, okay, what have I learned through this process of tadarruj, which is I've been in a process of growth. And what he then did was to set down what he thought was that in his Kitab al-Risala, which is like his master work on usul al-fiqh, because it's all about principles. It's not about individuals. It's not about individual fatawa. He's got Kitab al-Umm and he's got other works. I think I mentioned that yesterday. But what he has is a methodology. So even tadarruj, which is the specific instances of how to evolve, how to learn, how to experience things, and then all the individual experiences he had, like a travel log. At the end of it, he thought, I'm not going to write the travel log, but I'm also going to write the principles. This is the big rules that I've learned about. What's general, what's specific, what's abrogated, what is, the strength of a solitary hadith, and so on and so forth. He had his own opinions on it. Imam Malik had his own opinions. But the thing is, they had systems. They had the cumulative knowledge. They had the sense of there's certain things that are ilm. And if you know their lives, like Imam Malik rahimahullah, certain hadith he would ban in the city of Madinah Nawara, because the fallout, like the hadith of, if a person attacks, unfortunately, if this ever happened, a believer attacked another believer, the Prophet said, "La tadribuhu ala wajhihi fa inna Allah khalaqa Adam ala suratihi." Do not strike him ever on the face, because God created Adam in his form. Imam Malik, this is in Bukhari, this is in other Sahih collections. Imam Malik forbade the narration of this hadith while he was in Madinah Nawara. And the simple reason was, he wasn't denying it's true. He said the fitna of relating it would be greater than the benefit of relating it.
So there's a judgment.
Yeah, you would say it's Sahih. The Prophet did say it. We know he said it. He said, you cannot say this in the city, because the fallout of misunderstanding it, which is people thinking that God has a physical form, does not justify just narrating it. Look at that. Is that not thinking? It's fiqh. So this is the whole thing.
So surely man transgresses, and people who are not mindful, they fall in this category, that surely man transgresses. For the believer, for he believes himself to be self-sufficient. Final 2 to 3 minutes, Sheikh, and I want to wind this up with this concluding ayah. I've been meaning to ask, Inna ila rabbika ruj'a. Surely to your Lord is your return.
This is tough. This is like, when you explain something and you get a letter, like, imagine you've got a fine or something, and then you get a letter, but then the actual, somebody comes to the door and knocks. Like, there's there's real world consequences to your idea that you're mustaghni, that you're self-sufficient, because everything you do, when you rack up the, like a debt, you get more debt and more debt and more debt. At some point you're going to have to face paying that debt. So the more you feel you're self-sufficient and the arrogance builds, and this idea that you don't require Allah and you do not require any support from anybody else, even that you're completely self-sufficient from anybody, you don't need anybody, at a certain point that will come back to haunt you. And in the biggest sense, this idea of ujub, this idea of arrogance, this idea of self-sufficiency, which leads to, remember, it leads to this idea of godhood, because this is what Fir'aun, innahu tagha, he says, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I'm your highest Lord. That tughyan that he did, slowly, because unchecked. Tadarruj is different ways as well. Tadarruj goes the other way, which is bad, which is you get one step of insincerity to oppression to downright rebellion against Allah and His Messenger. Gets to the point that you think you're God yourself. You challenge Allah, you challenge the Creator.
You can do whatever you want, whenever you want.
Just remember, Allah is saying, Inna ila rabbika ruj'a. Indeed, it is to your Lord that the return is. It is not to anything else. Like the one that is you're contesting with, like the one that you're at war with, you're going to come back to him. And it's like all the shouting you can do and all the arrogance you could do when you're allowed to do it because nobody's there to check you. It's like, was it Conor McGregor used to mock Khabib, MMA mixed martial artist, and he swore at him, his family, made fun of the Dagestani people, and mocked him, and tried to pour whiskey on him, and what happened? All that because you think you're mustaghni, you think you can get away with just shouting because you can just rant. Okay, you think get away with it, and then what did Khabib say? Famously, I'm going to smash your man. And what happened is, gone to the octagon and he smashed the man. And at a certain point, that smacks you in the chin. You understand? And the reality is that's the way that Allah will deal with people. That there will a certain point that you can just give it free rein, and at a certain point, inna ila rabbika ruj'a. At a certain point, it is to your Lord that you'll come back. Don't worry.
You'll have to. Yeah.
We will smash you.
So whatever we do,
very powerful verse at the end of that. Yes,
we have to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the one who's going to deal with us. At that note, end of reflections for today. Inshallah, we'll be back tomorrow. Both Sheikh Rizwan and I, we seek your du'as. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.